Hello everybody, this is Poppy's Book Club and I'm reading A Story of a Vet, and we just read chapter 3 and I asked you some questions at the end of the chapter, so here are the answers. Let's see how you got on. So the first question was, what does James say to Mr. Pickerskill will cure his bad back? Okay. And the answer was, he needs to stop milking, because leaning over, doing the milking was causing his bad back, and he wants his daughter to take over. James wants his daughter to take over because James thinks his daughter is very gentle, but Mr. Pickerskill is not gentle and causing problems with the cows, but also having a bad back. Okay, so that's the answer, to stop milking. Question 2, what is the name of Mr. Pickerskill's daughter? The one who is really good at milking, and she's called Olive. So well done if you got that answer right. And right at the end of the chapter, Mr. Pickerskill bought some medicine from a man at the door who wasn't really a proper vet. So what was in the worm medicine that Mr. Pickerskill gave to his pig? It turned out it was turpentine. It's horrible stuff, which you definitely can't feed to a pig. So that was the answer to that one. Okay. So now I'm going to read chapter 4 of A Story of a Vet, and there'll be some questions at the end of that one. Okay. Chapter 4. I knew I shouldn't do it, but the old drover's road beckoned to me irresistibly. I ought to be hurrying back to the surgery after my morning call, but the broad green path wound beguilingly over the moor top, between its crumbling walls, and almost before I knew it, I was out of the car and treading the wiry grass. The walls skirted the hill's edge, and as I looked across and away to where Darrowby huddled far below, between its folding green fells, the wind thundered in my ears. But when I squatted in the shelter of the grey stones, the wind was only a whisper, and the spring sunshine hot on my face. The best kind of sunshine, not heavy or cloying, but clear and bright, and clean as you find it down behind a wall in Yorkshire, with the wind singing over the top. I slid lower till I was stretched on the turf, gazing with half-closed eyes into the bright sky, luxuriating in the sensation of being detached from the world and its problems. And it was easy to escape, lying up there quite alone with no sound but the wind sighing and gusting over the empty miles, and far up in the wide blue the endless brave trilling of the larks. Not that there was anything unpleasant about going back down the hill to Darrowby. I'd worked there for 2 years now, and Skeldale House had become home, and the 2 bright minds in it my friends. It didn't bother me that both the brothers were cleverer than I was. Siegfried, unpredictable, explosive, generous. I'd been lucky to have him as a boss. As a city-bred youth trying to tell expert stock farmers how to treat their animals, I'd needed all his skill and guidance behind me. And Tristan, a rum lad, as they said, but very sound. His humour and zest for life had lightened my days. And all the time I was adding practical experience to my theory. The mass of facts I'd learned at college were all coming to life, and there was the growing realization, deep and warm, excuse me, that this was for me. There was nothing else I'd rather do. Excuse me a moment. It must have been 15 minutes later when I finally rose, stretched pleasurably, took a last deep gulp of the crisp air, and pottered slowly back to the car for the 6-mile journey back down the hill to Darrowby. When I drew up by the railings, with Siegfried's brass plate hanging lopsidedly by the fine Georgian doorway, I looked up at the tall old house with ivy swarming untidily over the weathered brick. The white paint on windows and doors was flaking, and that ivy needed trimming, but the whole place had style, a serene, unchangeable grace. But I had other things on my mind at that moment. I went inside, stepping quietly over the coloured tiles which covered the floor of the long passage, till I reached the long offshoot at the back of the house. And I felt, as I always did, subdued excitement as I breathed the smell of our trade, which always hung there, ether carbolic. The latter was a spicy powder which we mixed with the cattle medicines. And today the thrill was stronger than usual because my visit was of a surreptitious nature. I almost tiptoed along the last stretch of passage, dodged quickly round the corner and into the dispensary. Gingerly, I opened the cupboard door at one end and pulled out a little drawer. I was pretty sure Siegfried had a spare hoof knife hidden away within it, and I had to suppress a laugh of triumph when I saw it lying there, almost brand new, with a nicely turned gleaming blade and a polished wooden handle. My hand was outstretched to remove it when a cry of anger exploded in my right ear. Caught in the act! Bloody red-handed, by God! Siegfried, who had apparently shot up through the floorboards, was breathing fire into my face. The shock was so tremendous that the instrument dropped from my trembling fingers, and I cowered back against a row of bottles. "Oh, hello, Siegfried," I said, with a ghastly attempt at nonchalance. "Just on my way to that horse of Thompson's. You know, the one with the pus in the foot. I seem to have mislaid my knife, so I thought I'd borrow this one." "Thought you'd nick it, you mean?" "My spare hoof knife. By heaven, is nothing sacred, James." I smiled sheepishly. Oh, you're wrong. I'd have given it back to you straight away." "A likely story," Siegfried said with a bitter smile. "I'd never seen it again, and you know damn well I wouldn't. Anyway, where's your own knife? You've left it on some farm, haven't you?" "Well, as a matter of fact, I laid it down at Willie Denham's place after I'd finished trimming his cow's overgrown foot, and I must have forgotten to pick it up." I gave a light laugh. "But God help us, James. You're always forgetting to pick things up, and you're always making up the deficiency by nicking my equipment. Have you any idea how much all this is costing me?" "But I'm sure Mr. Denham will drop the knife in at the surgery the first time he's in town." Siegfried nodded gravely. "He may. I'll admit that, he may. But on the other hand, he might think it's the ideal tool for cutting up his pipe tobacco. Remember when you left your carving overall at old Fred Dobson's place? The next time I saw it was 6 months later, and Fred was wearing it. He said it was the best thing he'd ever found for stooking corn in wet weather." "Yes, I remember. I'm sorry." I fell silent. My employer kept his fiery gaze fixed on me for a few moments. Then he shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, well, none of us is perfect, James, and I'm sorry I shouted at you. You know, I'm deeply attached to that knife, and this business of leaving things around is getting under my skin. I'll tell you what, let's go and sit down for a few minutes, and we'll talk about this problem." We went back along the passage, and as I followed him into the big sitting room, Tristan got up from his favourite chair and yawned deeply. "Ah, Tristan," Siegfried said, "I'm glad you're here, because what I have to say concerns you just as much as James. It's about leaving instruments on farms, and you're as guilty as he is." "You two are bringing me to the brink of ruin by losing expensive equipment. Some of it's returned, but a lot of it is never seen again. What's the use of sending you to visits when you come back without your artery forceps or scissors or something else? The profit's gone, you see." We nodded silently. After all, There's nothing difficult about bringing your instruments away, is there? You may wonder why I never leave anything behind. Well, I can tell you, it's just a matter of concentration. When I lay a thing down, I always impress on my mind that I've got to lift it up again. That's all there is to it. The lecture over, he became very brisk. Right, let's get on. There's nothing much doing, James, so I'd like you to come with me to Kendall's of Brookside. He's got a few jobs, including a cow with a tumour to remove. I don't know the details, but we may have to cast her. You can go on to Thompson's later. He turned to his brother. And you'd better come too, Tristan. I don't know if we'll need you, but an extra man might come in handy. We made quite a procession as we trooped into the farmyard, and Mr. Kendall met us with his customary humour. Hello, hello, we got plenty of manpower today, I see. We'll be able to tackle out with this regiment. Mr. Kendall had the reputation in the district of being a bit of a joker, and the phrase had a different meaning in Yorkshire from elsewhere. It meant that he was something of a know-all, and the fact that he considered himself a wag and a leg-puller didn't endear him to his fellow farmers either. Well, what do you want to see first, Mr. Farnan? He asked. He was a thick-set little man with a round, smooth-skinned face and mischievous eyes. I believe you have a cow with a bad eye, Siegfried said. Better begin with that. Right you are, Squire, the farmer cried. Then he put his hand in his pocket. Oh, before we start, here's something for you. He pulled forth a stethoscope. You left it last time you were here. There was a silence. Then Siegfried grunted a word of thanks and grabbed it hastily from his hand. Mr. Kendall continued, and the time before that you left your bloodless castrators. We did a swap over, didn't we? I gave you back the nippers and you left me the earphones. He burst into a peal of laughter. Yes, quite, Siegfried snapped, glancing uneasily round at us. But we must be getting on. Where is... You know, lads, chuckled the farmer, turning to us. I don't think I've ever known him come here without leaving summat. Really? Said Tristan interestedly. Aye, if I'd wanted to keep 'em all, I'd have a drawer full by now. Is that so? I said. Aye, it is, young man, and it's the same with all my neighbours. One feller said to me t'other day, he's a kind man, is Mr. Farnan, never calls without leaving a souvenir. He threw back his head and laughed again. We were enjoying the conversation, but Siegfried was stalking up to the byre. Where's this damned cow, Mr. Kendall? We haven't got all day. The patient wasn't hard to find. A nice light roan cow, which looked round at us carefully, one eye almost closed. From between the lashes, a trickle of tears made a dark stain down the hair of her face, and there was an eloquent story of pain in the cautious movements of the quivering lids. There's something in there, murmured Siegfried. Aye, I know. Mr. Kendall always knew. She's got a flippin' great lump of chaff stuck on her eyeball, but I can't get to it. Look here. He grabbed the cow's nose with one hand and tried to prise the eyelids apart with the fingers of the other. But the third eyelid came across, and the whole orbit rolled effortlessly out of sight, leaving only a blank expanse of white. There, he cried. Now to see, you can't make her keep her eyes still. I can, though. Siegfried turned to his brother. Tristan, get the chloroform muzzle from the car. Look sharp. No. The young man was back in seconds, and Siegfried quickly drew the canvas bag over the cow's face and buckled it behind the ears. From a bottle of spirit he produced a small pair of forceps of an unusual type, with tiny jaws operated by a spring. He poised them just over the closed eye. James, he said, give her an ounce. I dribbled the chloroform onto the sponge in the front of the muzzle. Nothing happened for a few moments while the animal took a few deep breaths. Then, Her eyes opened wide in surprise at the strange, numbing vapour rolled into her lungs. The whole area of the affected eye was displayed, with a broad gold piece of chaff splayed out across the dark eye. I only had a glimpse of it before Siegfried's little forceps had seized it and whisked it away. "Squeeze in some of that ointment, Tristan," said my employer, "and get the muzzle off James before she starts to rock." With the bag away from her face and the tormenting little object gone from her eye, the cow looked around her, vastly relieved. The only thing had taken only a minute or two, and was as slick a little exhibition as you'd wish to see. But Mr. Kendall didn't seem to think a great deal of it. "Aye, right," he grunted. "Let's get on with the next job." The cow with the tumour was standing just inside the door. The growth was at the back of the cow, a smooth, round object, like an apple, protruding from the animal's rear end, clearly visible to an inch to the right of the tail. Mr. Kendall was in full cry again. "Now we'll see what you're made of. How are you chaps going to get that thing off, eh? It's a big un. You'll need a carving knife or a hacksaw foot job. Are you going to put her to sleep or tie her up or what?" He grinned, and his bright little eyes darted at each of us in turn. Siegfried reached out and grasped the tumour, feeling round the base of his fingers. Yes. Bring me some soap and water and a towel, will you please? I have it just inside the door. The farmer scuttled into the yard and back again with the bucket. "Thank you very much," Siegfried said. He washed his hands and gave them a leisurely toweling. "Now, I believe you have another case to see. A scouring calf, wasn't it?" The farmer's eyes widened. "Yes, I have. But how about getting this big lump off the cow first?" Siegfried folded the towel and hung it over the half door. "Oh, I've removed the tumour," he said quietly. "What's that?" Mr. Kendall stared at the cow's backside. We all stared at it, and there was no doubt about it. The growth was gone. And there was another funny thing. There wasn't even a scar or mark remaining. I was standing quite close to the animal, and I could see exactly to a fraction of an inch where that big ugly projection had been, and there was nothing, not a drop of blood, nothing. "Aye," Mr. Kendall said. You've removed it. Aye, that's right." The smile had vanished from his face, and his entire personality seemed suddenly deflated. Being a man who knew everything and was surprised by nothing, he was unable to say, "Where the devil did you do it, and how, and what on earth have you done with it?" He had to maintain face at all costs, but he was rattled. He darted little glances around the byre, along the channel. The cow was standing in a clean swept stall with no straw, and there was nothing lying on the floor or anywhere. Casually, as though by accident, he pushed a milking stool to one side with his foot. Still nothing. "Well, now perhaps we can see the calf." Siegfried began to move away. Mr. Kendall nodded. Yes, the calf. It is in the corner there. I'll just lift bucket first." It was a blatant excuse. He went over to the bucket, and as he passed behind the cow, he whipped out his spectacles, jammed them on his nose, and directed a piercing glare at the cow's rear end. He only took an instant because he didn't want to show undue concern, but when he turned back towards us, his face registered utter despair, and he put his spectacles away with a weary gesture of defeat. As he approached, I turned and brushed against my employer. "Where the hell is it?" I hissed. "Up my sleeve," murmured Siegfried, without moving his lips or changing expression. "What?" I began, but Siegfried was climbing over a gate into the makeshift pen where the calf was cornered. He examined the little creature and injected it. He kept up a steady flow of light conversation, and Mr. Kendall, showing great character, managed to get his smile back on and answer back. But his preoccupied manner, the tortured eyes, and the repeated incredulous glances back along to the byre floor in the direction of the cow betrayed the fact that he was under immense strain. Siegfried didn't hurry over the calf, and when he had finished, he lingered a while in the yard, chatting about the weather, the way the grass was springing, the price of bullocks. Mr. Kendall hung on grimly, but by the time Siegfried finally waved farewell, the farmer's eyes were popping and his face was an anguished mask. He bolted back into the byre as the car backed round. I could see him, bent double with his glasses on again, peering into the corners. Poor fellow, I said. He's still looking for that thing. And for the God's sake, where is it anyway? I told you, didn't I? Siegfried removed one arm from the wheel and shook it. A round, fleshy ball rolled down into his hand. I stared at it in amazement. But I never saw you take it off. What happened? I'll tell you, my employer smiled indulgently. I was fingering it over to see how deeply it was attached when I felt it begin to move. The back of it was merely encapsulated by the skin, and when I gave another squeeze, it just popped out and shot up my sleeve. And after it had gone, the lips of the skin sprang back together again so that you couldn't see where it had been. Extraordinary thing. Tristan reached over from the back seat. Give it to me, he said. I'll take it back to the college with me and get it sectioned. We'll find out what kind of tumour it is. His brother smiled. Yes, I expect they'll give it some fancy name, but I'll always remember it as the only thing that shook Mr. Kendall. That was an interesting session in there, I said, and I must say I admired the way you dealt with that eye, Siegfried. Very smooth indeed. You're very kind, James, my boss murmured. That was just one of my little tricks. And of course, the forceps helped a lot. I nodded. Yes, wonderful little things. I've never seen anything like them. Where did you get them? I picked them up on an instrument stall at the last veterinary congress. They cost me a packet, but they've been worth it. Here, let me show them to you. He put his hand in his breast pocket, then his side pocket, and as he continued to rummage all over his person, a look of sick dismay spread slowly across his face. Finally, he abandoned the search, cleared his throat, and fixed his eyes on the road ahead. I'll show them to you some other times, James, he said huskily. I didn't say anything, but I knew, and Siegfried knew, and Tristan knew. He'd left them on the farm. It's funny, isn't it? He's telling the other two off about leaving things on the farm, and then he's leaving things on the farm all the time, isn't he? That's Siegfried. Right, so that was chapter 4. Hope you enjoyed it. So here are the questions for chapter 4. Have a go at them, and then next time I'll tell you the answers. Okay, so the first question. What was wrong with the first cow? Okay, so there's 3 cows that Siegfried and James and Tristan saw. What was wrong with the very first cow? Okay. Second question. Right at the beginning of the chapter, when James crept in quietly so Siegfried didn't hear him, what was he trying to borrow from Siegfried? Okay. He was trying to borrow something sneakily, and James and Siegfried caught him, didn't he? And question number 3. So this is a question about the tumour on the second cow that Mr. Kendall didn't know where it had gone, did he? So where did the cow's tumour end up as Siegfried was handling it? So when they were in the car on the way back, Siegfried told James what had happened. So see if you can remember, and we'll compare notes next time. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.